seen World War III over water, but I mean, things are debatable. I'm one of those people that's an optimist, and I don't think that that's going to happen. However, I'm one of those people that thinks that water will be a part of a whole host of other issues, exacerbate other conflicts, and then you're likely to see something a whole lot bigger. Over 2 million people every year are dying because of water-related issues, whether it's about bad water, unclean water, sanitation issues, or the lack of access. 1/3 of the globe doesn't have access to water. All of this is part of water security. Welcome. What is also part of this conversation is something that I was asked earlier today as to why the Munich Security Conference, which is about and has primarily been about hard security, quote unquote hard security, military defense, why are we talking about water, right? This morning I was in a discussion about food. There is discussions about climate and health. All of this is part of our larger security, our human security. And so for somebody like me, water becomes a very important aspect of all of these discussions. You cannot have food, health, you cannot have long-term economic growth, and so you cannot have your national security if you don't talk about water. And so to talk about some of these important aspects, we have this excellent panel. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go and introduce everyone individually, but I will do it when I pose a question to them. And I'm going to start with you, Ms. Omamo, who's our former cabinet secretary of the Foreign Ministry of Kenya. And the same question to you, Ms. Kar, a little bit similar questions to the both of you. Ms. Kar is the former foreign minister of Pakistan. One of the most problematic parts of water insecurity, the lack of water security globally, I think historically has and probably will continue to be political will. It's not about the fact that we don't have water. We have water globally. People might say that we are water stressed. We are water stressed in that access is a problem. We are water stressed in that we don't have always clean water. We don't have good data. And we have the technology. They say we don't have the money. The money is there. We just need to get it, right? So it's not actually any of these things, but it's will to ensure that we have proper water security for our communities and our nations. And both Ms. Kar and I come from a region that's very famous for this lack of political will on water cooperation. However, you come from an area that has gone through some of that in East Africa, but is, I think, getting better in some ways, but not quite there yet. So the question to the two of you is, how do we get there? What is it that we fundamentally need in terms of having proper political will to push that agenda forward, to push the needle to where we need to get it to?
I don't know whether the word is political will. I think the challenge that we have, at least in Kenya and perhaps in other parts of East Africa, is what you call state competence. The ability of the state to handle at the same time many security challenges, many threats conflating at the same time, and deliver public goods. If you look at the challenges we have, for instance, in the Horn of Africa, many parts of our countries are very distant from the state. Administration is weak in those areas, and those are the areas that are mainly affected by weather variables, lack of rainfall, and so on. Now, the way in which we're going to deal with water scarcity there is to be able to have stronger administrations, a stronger presence of the state, the ability to manage the water resources there more effectively, the professionals to do it, and the ability for the state to see that their sovereignty is dependent on their ability to deliver water to their peoples in an efficient and effective way. So for me, water security is about us investing in state rigor, the ability to get things done. It's not corruption, it's not lack of political will, it's just getting that groove moving and seeing something on the ground.
So perhaps understanding that this is a very fundamental aspect of your growth and development. I think that is lacking in many of our countries, is that they see growth and development as one aspect and then water as the other. The minute they see that this is interconnected, as you say, then that state capacity, I think, moves forward. Ms. Khar, to you?
Yeah, I think you intended it to be a bit of a political question, so I'm going to
No, not at all, but
okay.
go right ahead.
No, what I mean to say is that, okay, so if you look at water, it can be looked at three levels, okay? There's an international water issue, and, recently we had the UN taking a strong, accepting the fact that water was going to be a security issue and a development issue, etc., and doing a really big conference on it. It also happens to be there in the SDG. So at the international level, if you look at the international governance structure, I think what is missing and what is almost, it's almost ironic that it should be missing, is that a lot of efficiency, etc., and better water management technology exists in the first world, which never gets transferred to the developing countries, right? So we keep on doing conferences over conferences, asking ourselves, how do we do it? What about the benefit of transferring the technology that already exists? So you don't need to go and get more rocket science technology. There's an immense amount of technology that already exists, which just requires resources for it to be transferred to the developing world. Within the developing world, obviously that technology is going to be most efficiently used within the rural areas where water is most badly used in terms of agrarian, because of agriculture. As somebody who comes from an agrarian background, believe me, I understand the importance of water. And water is not taken lightly. Battles are fought, enmities are, so it is very, very important. Now, from the region, you mentioned the region, and I think it's exceptionally important. From the region that we come, interestingly, which has been mired in conflict and adversarial relationships with each other for as long as I've been born, and
That's
I guess
very politely put.
a bit diplomatically put. It's remarkable how much we share of water, which is a source of life, right? We share our glaciers, we share our rivers, we pretty much have the same sea. We are conjoined twins when it comes to water management. So my rival, so to speak, not using water efficiently, pours really badly for me, okay? Now, however, interestingly, having been foreign minister, a lot of people, non-governmental, government, say that, oh, let's start dialogue and let's try and slip water in, and maybe because of that people will be threatened. I'm like, no. I mean, why do we need to slip water in? Why not have the confidence to say that this is a shared regional good and we need to have conversation? Now, obviously, we have seen how, for me, for instance, a danger point lurking, not in the background but in the forefront, is the Indus Water Treaty is a treaty which has been mentioned globally as a very good management of water between two countries which have been sparring neighbors, right? And of recently, like never before, our neighbor has raised questions about renegotiating it, which could be leading to, I mean, that's the type of things that lead to animosity, adversarial behavior turning into war-like situation, right? And the famous quote that blood and water cannot, these are scary things, okay? And so I guess that's what it is. I think water is what it is, water's efficacy, its requirement cannot be over-exaggerated, but whether it's at the international level, at the regional level, at the solutions exist, we just need to have the resources and the will to be able to do it.
So that will is still missing, and state capacity or the state wanting to do this also in a way. But I'm going to pick up on something that you said, right, on the fact that the tech exists in some parts of the world, which I think is really important to mention. But I want to bring along with that is the fact that in our countries, in Kenya, and in many of our other parts of the world, we also have indigenous knowledge that exists, which we have completely sidelined. So neither are we using that indigenous knowledge, nor are we accessing the tech. So we are middling somewhere in the middle and not helping ourselves at all. And so I'm going to bring that question. I actually had a different question, but I think this is a good question to bring to you, Ms. Schmidt, who's Secretary General with the OSCE. What role do you see an organization like yours then playing in perhaps bridging that conversation, and not only bridging it from bringing together knowledge, bringing together that state capacity that might be required, but also bringing it as part of other discussions, and as Ms. Khar said, not just slipping it in, but making it big?
No, absolutely. So indeed, I represent the OSCE, which is 57 countries from North America to Central Asia is part of it, Mongolia, South Caucasus, the whole of Europe. And we have countries that are part of the water insecure states. It's almost 80% of the population. So this is a huge issue, and it's a security issue. We may not have had a third world war over water, as you said, but for sure, I mean, also if you take the impact of climate change, this can fuel conflicts, and at the same time, I mean, we see more and more conflicts that have a negative impact on governments, and this also relates to your point, which I fully agree, that have a negative impact on governments' capacity to actually exercise responsible environmental governance. So, but coming to your question, I think this is exactly what we do in the OSCE. We see water and water security as a And this is obvious because you have more than, I think, 150 countries that share a river or a lake. So you cannot approach these issues in isolation.
Talk to each other about this, and India is definitely one of those countries for sure. China is another. There are several others around the world that look at this as very much as a national issue. You know, as Ms. Khar said, water in our region, I've traveled a lot in parts of Africa, water is a very emotive subject. And so what happens then in that situation? How do you move to the next step?
I have to say we've been rather successful in getting countries to work together. I mean, India is not part of the organization, so I cannot comment. But I think there is an absolute opportunity also in terms of cooperation over water issues. And this can be, particularly for countries that have issues elsewhere, it can be confidence building, trust building. And we have seen that in the OSCE. Take Central Asia, for example. I mean, a couple of years ago, there were huge issues, and now there is a close cooperation. We have helped, for example, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan to establish a river basin commission. We have field missions on the ground in both countries that help them, that support them. I see a clear link, of course, with climate change. Climate change is changing the rainfall patterns, etc., increasing floods, droughts. So what we have done is in the whole OSCE area, we have been mapping the hotspots, and we have identified 42 hotspots. This is areas where climate change will have a huge impact and could potentially also trigger conflicts and so on. We've brought these countries together cross-border. And again, I think the important thing here is not only rely on the governments, really bring in the civil society. I can give you an example in southeastern Europe, North Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo. We work with governments, the local community, park rangers, and we have done a joint mapping of governments. So networks across the board are important, particularly women's networks.
Yes. May I just interject and say this? Before we start engaging in transboundary conflict resolution around water, you've got to build that culture internally. And there's so many points of conflict. There's conflict between the rural and the urban, between women and men, between county governments and national governments, between pastoralists and settlers. You know, we have to start to build a culture of peace around water internally before you think you can go to your neighbor and start talking about sharing. Learn how to share internally. Find out what you have. You know, one of our biggest problems in Africa, we don't even know the extent of our water resources.
The data.
We don't have the data. And even if we have the data, we're too busy looking for oil and, you know, rare minerals, you know. Those are the things that excite our people and not water. So we need to build that culture of, one, understanding the value of water, two, understanding that we need to share it and building those mechanisms internally, and then thereafter moving out to the region with best practice. I think let's not be too ambitious and think that we're going to solve the Nile crisis without us solving just the issue between Nairobi and Murang'a over water that's running 50 kilometers, you know, between two towns.
Absolutely.
So let's be practical, especially as Africans. Let's be practical. Let's protect what we have. Let us know what we have. Let us learn how to share it, and then let's then share it with our neighbors. That was the approach
I think we can end now, no? But no, I'm just kidding. But no, I think it's absolutely right. You know, it's the lack of data, it's the lack of knowledge of what we have, we don't know, so we don't think we have it. But it's also that fundamental point is that we see water as this endless supply that we can just use and abuse. And so water security is not part of these conversations. And so I'm going to bring that to you then, Ms. Benali, who's our Minister for Energy and Sustainable Development, right, from the Kingdom of Morocco. Fabulous country, by the way. I love Morocco. Been there. I spent my honeymoon there, and I spent that back a couple of times as well after that. So.
And you had water, I hope.
We did.
Good.
Yes. Morocco's been an interesting case study in that it's built confidence with the neighborhood and the larger continent on various other aspects. And I'm wondering if you'd like to then connect that to the two topics that have been brought up, one on trust, using other ways to build confidence, but also understanding what we have, and maybe talk about how cooperation on, if you want to maybe talk about energy or other aspects of sustainable development, how can we learn from that and perhaps bring it to this more contentious area then of water?
Right. Oh yes, I'm mic'd. No, I think it's a great question, and I've been listening to a lot of things that were said here, and I think one point that resonated with me was related to the government's capacity, and when it comes to, because middle-income countries or even low-income countries, we are trying to solve the problems of the world when I'm thinking about energy transition and sustainable development and climate by being centers of energy technologies, mining strategic and critical minerals to win that energy transition of the world, trying as much as possible to mitigate and adapt to climate change, while at the same time we can see it every day. I mean, our agriculture sector is suffering today because we had the worst drought in 40 years in Morocco. And that's why I was half joking when I asked you whether you had water during your honeymoon, because
It was a long time ago.
I'm not getting there. The question really today is how to ensure that those governments, especially for those countries like us and others, who have tried to regionalize decision-making processes as much as possible and investment-making decisions as much as possible, are able, in an increasingly complex world, to ensure that whatever economic system you're building at the local level or at the federal level is equipped to manage climate, pollution. Morocco, we are also president of United Nations Assembly for the Environment, and one of the things that we've been very conscious about is this issue around plastic pollution. It's perverse, it's everywhere, it's ubiquitous, it's the most important ubiquitous pollution that you can get. Every person inhales or ingests between 1 and 5 milligrams of microplastics and nanoplastics every week. So equivalent of a credit card. And we have that in our body. And now it's crossing the brain barrier. I'm not going to start there, but water pollution is definitely an important issue there. How can we equip regional, local, and even central governments to deal with those very complex issues that are coming up here in the 21st century? Plastic pollution, after our long history of plastic production and consumption with very limited recycling. Climate, this is something that we are just scratching the surface on the implications of climate on many countries. I mean, some countries will disappear actually after 2040. And what do we do with those countries? I mean, it raises sovereignty and identity questions that, I'm not even talking about climate migration. I'm talking about countries disappearing, usually island countries. Again, water. As far as, I want to get back to the issue at hand, for many countries, yeah, I mean, and you asked about trust, it's very important for Morocco because the way we've been handling our strategies, our sectoral strategies, water strategy being one of them, and it's very important because this is actually, I usually think that with water and waste management are the two sectors where there's no space for error. If you make policy mistakes, pollution, corruption, and things like that, you can always repair a road if there's a problem. You can always repair a port if there's a problem. I don't think you can depollute a water well that was totally broken, or you cannot actually resort to or solve a waste management project that went totally, especially that you have liters and liters of lexivia that will go into your water aquifers. This is totally unbearable. And you can inject as much capex as you want into that, it doesn't change anything. So I think when it comes to the cost of error is too high in these sectors, that the importance of having governments and the decision-making process being and a much higher level of governance being respected is not only critical, it's very high. And I fully agree with the fact that dichotomy between urban and rural, and between different cities, and also between different sectors. We have in some countries, and I mean, the agriculture sector being taking a lot of the water resources, and people will say, well, why do you go for watermelon or avocado production instead of, I would say, lower water intensive agriculture, for example? So it has an impact on every...
Bananas.
Bananas, I'm not an expert. I mean, this gets into every little aspect of your sectorial strategy, whether you like it or not. So, again, I'm not minimizing the importance of other sectors, but this is usually where we definitely, and I insist on that, we definitely need to ensure that not only you have cross-border cooperation, cross-border capacity building, but also, and at some point we'd have to put that on the table, cross-border pricing and taxes.
Yeah. So water needs to be part of every single conversation, whether we are talking about food, whether we are talking about economic development. I mean, the automobile industry, for example, is one of the largest users of water. We don't think about that. Where are the automobile industries setting up shop around the world? We don't think about that when it comes to the water security. So it comes back also then to what Ms. Omamo said about building those systems within countries, along with, I would say, not, I mean, it cannot be one or the other, but also building that system across countries. I'm going to urge the audience to think about any questions that you might have. I will come to all of you in a couple of minutes. But Ms. Khan, I wanted to ask if you wanted to comment on anything that's been said so far, either from, you know, the Pakistan experience, because that system building is definitely something that has not been the best in Pakistan, in India, but in many parts of the developing world. And is that the way then we move forward?
Look, I think what has happened, at least in most of the developing world, is that water has never been considered to be of, the value to water has never been attached.
Yes.
So the pricing of water has always been missing. So water has been seen to be a free public good. Okay, so I can, for instance, mention that when it comes to which crops should a country like Pakistan, which is considered to be water scarce now, highly water scarce, should have gone for, sugarcane should have never been an option for us, right? But here we are planting sugarcane in, you know, large number of hectares and becoming sugar producers. So that's one aspect which I just wanted to mention, is the pricing and the management of water. And then as it happens at the international level, and I think it is perhaps more, it's also happening at the local level, that there's so much technology that exists to use water more efficiently, but that is not considered to be a priority in subsidizing for the farmers to encourage them. It is not looked at it as something which is critical, a critical need.
Because it's a politics issue then also.
It is a political issue. Yeah, I mean, and then most importantly, I think, as you know, my Moroccan colleague was speaking, climate change. I don't think anyone has grasped. So there could be a third war on water, because what climate change is doing is taking us off our normal norms of management of water. I'll give you the example of Pakistan. In 2022, we had the floods of a proportion we'd never witnessed before. 2/3 of our country, or 1/3 of our country at least, was literally permanently underwater. Waterborne disease, immense. Now, what had happened was that the area which was supposed to get a lot of water, where we had dams, was actually going through drought conditions. And the area which never saw a morsel or a drop of rain was inundated with rain from the heavens in a way as if the riverine had flooded. So that's what climate change does. It makes unpredictable how it's going to happen. Now, are we prepared for that? Are we resilient? Have we adapted enough? I would say the answer to all of that is no. And on top of that, because, I would just want to put the geopolitical angle to that, we are in the point, I was sitting here in another town hall where we were talking about how will we increase the budget for military financing, encouraging everyone to do it. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, we have climate change as a major problem. We have SDGs, which have long been forgotten. We have war-torn countries, and countries where wars have been, recently ended, so to speak, or interventions have recently ended, which are actually have no resources. And we are thinking of how to find the resources to fund more wars. How about finding the resources to stop war? It's really remarkable that there's so many global public goods which are out there unattended, and we are now finding resources, not how to maintain SDGs and do the $1 trillion developing country financing a year that is required, but how to fund more war is the topic of discussion. It's rather remarkable.
Could I just say something about, just to follow up on her point?
Can I take a couple of questions and then you can maybe add on
No worries.
to that because I am getting signals about the time, so I do want to take a couple of questions from the audience. Our first question, in fact, is going to be from Ms. Alimu from Addis Ababa. She's a fellow Munich Young Leader of this 2024 cohort, so welcome to the cohort. Question to you, and then I will come to anybody else who has a question to me. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you to the panelists. My question revolves around, well, we know the role that basin organizations play in transboundary water management and cooperation, but I work at the African Union Commission in preventive diplomacy, and I'm always curious in terms of what kind of organizations like the AU and the ASEAN and OSCE, what role can they play and how can they complement basin organization efforts? Is there a value addition to their involvement in these issues? Thank you.
That's a very good question. I have an answer, but I don't think it's appropriate to say it. Anybody else have a question? No? Then I have many more questions, but do you want to go back to your point from earlier, or if you would like to answer the question also?
Okay, let me just go back to the point I wanted earlier, and then I might be able to answer the other question. My sister here mentioned a perspective about, war, the military, and so on. One thing that we were able to do when I was the Minister of Defense of Kenya is to deploy the military into dealing with water scarcity and depletion of catchment areas and so on. So the military in Kenya have an environmental soldier program, and in the areas where we have a lot of conflict, they dig water pans for people, drill boreholes, reclaim forests, and so on. I think we need to be able to adopt a strategy that ensures that all hands are on deck, and so that we don't discount the value of the resources that we have in our military, their rapid deployment capacities, their ability to help in disaster response, and so on. What we need are strategies that will ensure that everybody who can assist the state in delivering water does so, and to leave no one left behind. With regard to the question about frameworks from places like the AU, I think it's important for regional and continental bodies at least to have the frameworks through which countries can be guided in resolving transnational border questions. And two, countries must respect the intervention of regional bodies in the resolution of their conflicts. I know that many water disputes in the AU have not been resolved because trust in AU processes is weak. People would rather go to outside the continent and seek external actors to resolve issues that can be dealt with in Africa and within the mechanisms that are available. Some countries even decide to internationalize their water disputes and take them to the United Nations Security Council, when the AU is competent enough to deal with those matters if the legitimacy of the AU is respected. So even as African countries, we've got to respect the AU, and the AU also has to live up to its expectations.
That's a really important point. Do you want to answer the question?
No, I feel compelled, also as the OC was mentioned, so just to say it's precisely the frameworks you were mentioning, and I think here the UN has done some good work. There is the UN Water Decade, the UN Water Action Plan. We are supporting, for example, in the OEC, Dushanbe. There will be the third Dushanbe Water Action Conference that will take place soon in Tajikistan, one of the countries affected. But one issue are the frameworks in place, but I think what international organizations can do and what we're doing in the OEC is we cannot substitute lack of political will, of course. I mean, we depend on the political will you mentioned earlier on, but what we can do is really raise awareness. We do it with the younger generation, particularly when it comes to climate change, raise awareness and offer capacity building, because you're right, one thing is transboundary cooperation, but of course we also need governments to be able to deal with and cope with the problems. So capacity building, help them with eco-friendly systems, and again here, disaster risk reduction, early warning, this is all very important. I think this is the added value that we can bring. And also I'm a huge supporter of the new agenda for peace that Secretary General Guterres is promoting, because it allows regional organizations to also share best practices, work together, support each other, and so in this context, I think also the work we do is quite valuable.
The UN systems are designed to help countries in various aspects. I'm a little hesitant to agree with everything you said, maybe some of what you said, but I think the fact that we have this system to allow for exchange of knowledge is very valuable. Has the UN been useful in some of these aspects? I would say perhaps not as much as we would like to believe. You know, the UN Water Conference that we had last year in March, everyone said, oh my God, what an amazing conference. The people who don't work on water but know that I work on water asked me, do you go to the UN Water Conference every year? And I said, no, because the last time it happened 47 years ago. I wasn't there, right? So I think that now it places me a little bit also in that age question. But why did we wait 47 years to have a water conference? Why did we wait till we had a climate, we're in the middle of a climate crisis? Because the climate crisis is a water crisis. If we solve for the water, we can solve for the climate. And I wrote an article recently where that was the title of the article, and then the media house said, oh, can you change the title? And I said, no, I'll publish this elsewhere if you don't want that title, right? So I think we have to really, as you also said, put all of this together. But how do we do that? And I wanted to come back to all of you for one final comment, 1 minute each, and then we'll close, as to what is it very concrete that you think you can tell the audience sitting here, but also beyond, as to when it comes to thinking about action on water security, what is it that needs to be done, either from a intergovernmental organization perspective or a government organization or an NGO, whatever it is that you want to give one concrete thought for people to take away. Do you want to go first and add on to what you were saying earlier?
No, I just want to add something, and that can be my final word. I think what is very important is what you said, is I think the focus is now so much on the military side, because we see more and more conflicts, and I'm not commenting on that, but I think it's so important not to forget about the need really to promote the Sustainable Development Goals, because everything is linked. I mean, the access to, the right of access to water is linked to climate change, is linked to sustainable cities or to the fight against poverty, and I think that that is what's at stake here. It's water will have an impact on food insecurity, and that will trigger conflict. So here, I think not to lose that out of sight and have the advocacy for that. I think that is for me very important.
Excellent. Yes, Ms. Benali?
A new deal, a totally new deal for multilateralism and development finance, because I was here listening to you talking about multilateral system, and it's true. I mean, I think it's a bit unfair what we are saying to the UN system as a whole, because this was crafted in the 20th century after Second World War for a specific set of challenges. We are in 21st century, 2024, very much more complex issues. It's true that budget is going to armament, but we still need the capabilities of the armies in our countries to be able to fast-track solutions and fast-track all the issues that we are facing. So I think we need a totally new deal.
New deal, yes. Ms. Khan?
So that's the interesting part, because the New Deal we need at the international level, we need at the regional level, we need at the country level, we need at the local level, at the house level.
Reset button.
You know, but the good part is that my children growing up are much more careful about wasting water than I was growing up. Okay, so that gives me a little bit of hope. But very quickly, I think, look, like CO2 emissions, whatever we've sent, no matter how much resilient we become, how much adaptation we do, that will remain in the atmosphere. You cannot undo the damage that you've already done. In the same way, water, if it's been used inefficiently, you can't undo the damage that you've already done. However, I will go back. I think the really easy, sometimes we try to make problems very complex, and they're not very complex. They're kind of simple. Technology that already exists, wherever it exists, international to regional, regional to national, within national, incentivize use of technology to use water efficiently, use water as a resource. Let's start respecting water, and wastage and efficiency should be put in. And then, of course, exceptionally importantly, that any planning, agriculture, what we make, which country makes what, water deficient countries should not be in high water requirement crops, etc.
So use technology a little more efficiently around the world.
And transfer. The real point is transfer the technology that already exists on the global arena to places that need it the most. So no rocket science required.
Including water treatment.
Yes. Finally to you, ma'am.
Center women.
Center women.
In this fight for
what more do you want?
water justice. I'd like to see women trained as mediators, negotiators, especially when you're dealing with transboundary disputes. I'd like to see women playing a bigger role at local government, because it's in our cities that the real crisis is going to arise in the next 20 years. I'd like to see women trained as water professionals, as statisticians, as data collectors, as technicians. These are areas where women are not participating in our countries, and we are finding that their talent is dormant, it's redundant, and yet they are the key actors in distributing our water. They carry it on their backs for us every morning. So let's elevate the status of women, and as we mainstream women's contributions, we should also mainstream water as a critical part, a critical element of every aspect of our development. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. This has been fantastic. I wish we had a lot more time. I'm going to wrap up, right? Center Women. I'm glad you mentioned the Women in Water Diplomacy Network that I'm really pleased to say I'm a member of. So I will tell Elizabeth that you mentioned this. Advocacy, advocate for all of this at all levels. So it's really amazing that, it's taken a long time. I've been coming to the MSC for more than a decade, and I've been saying, let's talk about water. We're finally doing it, but that's great that we're actually having these sort of conversations in this kind of a setting. Bring the tech everywhere, make it accessible. Let's use that knowledge, both on the indigenous side and the tech side. And a new deal, build our systems better, right? That's what we're saying, is build our systems better. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much. I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. This is one of my topics at my heart, so I'm thankful also to the MSC for asking me to moderate, and thank you all. Please join me in saying thank you to the panel, yeah?